Thanks for joining us for the November edition of the Lee Schools TV podcast. I'm Rob Spicker, Assistant Director in the Communications Department, and our focus today is going to be on Hurricane Ian. We're going to go behind the scenes a little bit about the decision-making process in the school district of Lee County as we recovered from this hurricane with Chief of Staff Michael Ramirez, who's joining us here today. As Chief of Staff, Mike was kind of the point person for the superintendent to help direct the response, the recovery, and the reopening from Hurricane Ian. So, Mike, I want to thank you for joining us, taking us into this deep dive a little bit. I want to go back maybe a few days before the storm, a week or so before, because that's really when the school district kind of puts its hat on and says, we've got a storm coming, we got to start thinking about it, planning ahead, and making decisions. So what's happening in that 7 to 5 day time frame before Hurricane Ian actually even hits?
Sure. So anytime we have any type of potential impending storm, we are immediately connected with our county emergency operations center. So our executive director, Chief Newland over safety, continues to provide us updates around what we're thinking, what we're seeing with the storm, potential projections and impacts. So as late as 7 days out, we were monitoring the storm and seeing where the paths were and trying to follow, knowing that it's a maze when you look at all those different projections. It's kind of a zigzag, could go anyway. So, but we continue to monitor it and stay attuned, get updates. So we were getting daily updates around where the storm was and potential landfall locations. As we continue to work through, as we got a little closer, 3 days out, and we started to see a little bit more possibility, we started to really stand up some, meetings, with our own folks here in the district, or what we'll call our own, Lee Schools or school district, our own EOC team, to be able to start thinking about, what that looks like, and reviewing our pre-storm, during storm, our manual. We obviously have protocols around what that looks like. So we started reviewing those, and kind of going over, all the different pieces that we need to be prepared for.
One of those key decisions you have to make when these storms approach is closing schools. So that comes on Monday, that schools are closed. What was the final determining factor to say it's time?
Yeah, so we stayed connected through the weekend. We actually had a standing call. We had a call Friday, we had a call Saturday, we had a call on Sunday with our own immediate team as we're thinking about the preparations. And so Monday about midday, we had a meeting with the Lee County Emergency Operations Center. So we went there, Dr. Bernier, myself, and a couple of few key staff members, to really talk about what the projections were, what we were seeing. So our county manager, Roger DeJarlais, our sheriff, just started to really look at here's where we could potentially see things. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to know that a lot of those projections didn't have Lee County or our district in direct hit early on. Those trajectories, obviously there was a significant shift in the hours following, but we started to look at what did we see in the preparations for that. And when we think about that, we think about it in two ways, right? It's always about student safety and getting our kids. So we had school on Monday, but we started looking at the potential projections of when the storm and when conditions would begin to change, and our ability to be able to get students to school and back home safely becomes a decision point, as well as the ability for us to obviously not have school, so that our shelters, because a number of our shelters are, a number of our schools are shelters, so being able to do that. So, and so that Monday we came, away from the EOC. While the projections didn't have a direct hit, there was a forecast of changing weather conditions, particularly for Tuesday evening, and that's when the decision, late afternoon on that Monday, the decision was made to cancel school for the following day for students, because of obviously the safety. And then there's the preparation component, right? For our employees, for staff, parents, to be able to prepare for what the potential may be. So those are kind of the two decision points that we looked at when we ultimately didn't have school. And then obviously working with the county and notifying them, we were not going to have school on Tuesday. So, and then their ability to mobilize and potentially at that point, because it's still not projected to be a directive, but to potentially open some of our school shelters.
And that happened Tuesday morning. The shelters are opening up. We've got school staff that report to those sites. But at the district level, there's the presence of mind to start working with our insurance companies and FEMA to plan for a recovery.
So first, I like to, the opening of our shelters. I mean, tremendous appreciation and gratitude goes out to our school leaders and our teams who, I don't know if everyone knows, manage the shelters, right? So our own staff manage the shelters, and it's a commitment our leaders make, when they take on, all these roles. And so incredible gratitude and appreciation for that and the work that happened there to serve our community. We work in service of our community. And so looking at that, then kind of moving forward to like when we mobilize shelters. I think the plan was originally we opened 8 shelters with an additional 4 that were going to come on. There was a total of 15 total. 3 other shelters were not a part of that. But just thinking through what that looked like and really, but the foresight, right? So we had that. We were coming together, and so we began the conversations. We had the shelters mobilized and opening that, but started to think about during storm and post storm, right? What impacts would that be? So it was really important that we were ready for the after, preparing for, obviously praying and hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst and trying to triage it in that form. So, prior to Ian coming on Wednesday, like we had stood up and had we connected with our FEMA consultant that would help us assess damages after the storm if we were in a place where we needed to assess damage. And so we had that. We also established our radio communication protocols in the event that we lost power, that we would still be able to communicate. We know that happened for several days, but we had radio communication, which, for the days after the storm, for several days after the storm, our only means of communication with our district leadership team or our own internal EOC was via radio communication. And so we established some protocols for that, as well as intentional check-ins throughout, before the storm, and then we worked on a potential cadence, during and post-storm.
So Wednesday, when Hurricane Ian comes through, it is that worst case scenario that's been talked about but never seems to happen, right? The storm surge is huge on the beach. The winds are powerful through Cape Coral. So I'm just curious to ask you, as somebody who's been in Florida for a while, at what point did you realize this wasn't just a storm that will open up in a few days from now? Like this was going to be a disaster?
Yes, it definitely was intense, and there was all types of emotions, and even having been in Florida, I mean, each storm is different, and it brings its own emotions, and obviously with 2 young girls at home, with a wife and a small dog, it adds to as you're managing the storm and obviously the responsibilities that you have. But I think that probably sometime as the storm hit, began to make landfall, I think it's important. Our executive director, Chief Newland, was. He was at the Emergency Operations Center, and he was there for the duration of the storm. And so as we lost power, I think I can remember in my own home, somewhere around 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, we lost power that Wednesday and didn't get power on till that following Friday. So we had, a significant number of days without power. But so he was our eyes and ears, just providing us updates, because we didn't have television and we didn't have, the ability to be able to see. So he was our eyes and ears to let us know the storm had shifted. It seemed like the eye was making landfall, around the Cape Coral area. And so he was really the ones that was providing us those updates. And, in that shift, you began to just get a sense from him, from what he was seeing as he was sharing with us, that, this was a storm that it was starting to see some of the impacts and what it had as it made its way over Cuba and coming towards, the Southwest Florida, that, this wasn't going to be an ordinary storm. It was going to be something that potentially could bring some significant damage.
Yeah, I know when I saw the pictures of the roadway for the Sanibel Causeway Thursday morning, that's when I realized how big this was. It wasn't just one of those, we'll be back in a couple days.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because that was one of the first things that Chief Newland mentioned. He said, he just said, guys, like, this is the catastrophic damage I've never seen. And he mentioned, I can remember the radio call, I still kind of get chills. He said, the causeway it's not there. He said it just it's in the water. And so I think I could remember kind of the radio silence, because we were all on radio. I could remember that. He's like, I don't have any words to describe what I'm seeing, because, the Emergency Operations Center has all the footage up, so you're able to see and the broadcasting. And it was, we began to really understand that it became a reality that we had significant work ahead of us.
So we wake up on that Thursday morning. It's time to begin the recovery effort. And one of the things the superintendent has mentioned to me is that he wanted a triad approach to getting us back on our feet. So what does that mean, and how do you implement that?
Yeah, sure. So the triad approach is really around, you're working on the immediate, like what's the immediate issue, concern, problem. There's the next, and then there's the what I call the next, right? That longer term, like things that we have to be thinking about. So, the immediate was around just immediate assessment and kind of looking at that. But then we started thinking about the next, right? How do we connect with our school leaders, connect with schools, start to assess damage? And then that next or that longer term is now, how do we respond to that damage? And when we start thinking about what type of damage, because at that point it was still an unknown around what type of damage. And we know that, in some of our buildings, we had minimal impact, but in others, a few buildings, we had significant, damage that we were not going to be able to potentially return students. So you start thinking about all those things. So while we're working on, so it's about mobilizing, dealing with the immediate, but then mobilizing the right key folks. And I cannot thank enough the not only the partnership with Lee County Emergency Operations Center, which became our home base because our very own building didn't have power. So we posted up in the cafeteria of the Emergency Operations Center, and that became, I know, Rob, you were there a couple of days, so we actually spent, significant time, and so I can't thank, our county Emergency Operations Center. I can't thank our sheriff enough for the opportunity he gave us as we started to, support us in assessing our buildings, including a ride, took us up in the chopper, both Dr. Bernie and myself to our island schools as well to visit. And then incredible support from districts around the state. Department of Education, our Commissioner of Education came down and went up in the helicopter with our superintendent, Dr. Bernier, and what followed was just an outpouring of support, not only from the Department of Education here in Florida, but also from school districts around the state. It was really incredible.
It was. Let me ask you about those flights to those schools, particularly over the county, but out to the barrier islands, and the impressions and the response of what was seen at Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, Pine Island, and Hector Cafferata, the other schools.
Yeah, I think having never been up in a helicopter, that in itself was a pretty unique experience. But I would say that, just the impact going up and just kind of seeing the aerial view of what it looked like and the damage was something I'll never forget. And it really, you had ideas, but then it became a reality. The kind of damage and destruction that our community, just that had suffered and experienced, and just as you start to see roofs, I can remember looking through the marinas and just seeing boats and cars and just the flooding, and it just began to set in that this was a recovery effort, and a long-term one to really start thinking through that. And landing on Pine Island, remember the principal landing on Pine Island. Pine Island, for all intents and purposes, should not have been there, and it was there, and very little, if any, water intrusion in the building, and so just seeing that in the community, and just seeing housing and the things that we were now going to have to that long-term recovery, it was something that definitely was impacted. I was impacted significantly by it, and just I'll never forget.
Yeah. So principals were then tasked in those first few days after the storm to go and give an inspection of their campus. They're not experts, but it did come back pretty good that more than half of the schools might be considered low damage. Did that give you encouragement about a possibility of getting back open and on our feet sooner rather than later?
Yeah, tremendous appreciation to our school leaders who went out. We assess instruction in classrooms. We're not experts in building and building envelope and roofs, but those initial assessments were just getting eyes on building. What were we seeing out there? So they went out to schools, and we established kind of a low, medium, high, just based on a visual approach, not ripping things down, not seeing amount of debris, any water intrusion, things of that nature. But that gave us, I would say, we were encouraged. We were definitely encouraged that we had a significant amount of our schools that we categorized as low. It's important to note that some of those lows, as we started to peel back, then became medium, then became high. But those are those initial assessments to have an idea, and then those that had some damage, but we categorized as I think the medium was the one that was kind of a little gray, and then the high where roofs were peeled back, windows were missing from schools, and all buildings that had taken in significant water were classified as high. So that's kind of how our initial assessments to be able to start that process. But I think it's also important, we had to take a step back and allow our leaders, our staffs to actually assess their own damage within their homes as well. We're trying to balance. This storm really tested the balance between the personal, and the professional responsibilities we have in our jobs, because many of our school leaders, our administrators, and our staff, our teachers, and those who support our students experienced significant damage as well within their homes. A number of them lost their homes. So I think it was important to find that right balance. And we told leaders, you have to take care of your home, take care of stuff at home before you can start to think about repairing. So it was finding that what we call the just right balance between that.
There are homeowners probably today still complaining that they can't get a contractor to come work. And within days, we've got contractors working on, as many as 88 of our school buildings to get them back into place. So how did that happen so quickly on such a large scale?
I think a lot was around the pre-storm preparation that was done around, lining up consultancy with, one of the consultants to help us with, the FEMA piece. I know if, our community who's listening knows that, particularly homeowners, what that may look like, and obviously with insurances and things of that nature. But and then the efforts of an incredible team. Our team really collectively together just mobilized, and everyone taking different roles. Obviously, I can't speak enough about the team, our internal team, in leadership. Whether it's in finance, maintenance, facilities. I mean, it was just collectively everyone just kind of coming together, establishing just kind of some clear goals of what we were trying to accomplish with some deadlines, and then working with, so many that just stepped up, in support. And in addition to those contractors, I can't speak enough around the support that we had from our districts around the state. I think of Miami-Dade, who was boots on the ground as a thought partner. Alex Martinez, who came over and made multiple trips, over the course of a week, almost daily at times, going back and forth to help support in the strategic thinking around the recovery. Broward County, Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, Marion County, Volusia, the list goes on. I don't want to leave anyone out, but just so many that helped in that recovery, whether it was, and it wasn't just debris pickup, HVAC, plumbers, all types of folks that come in to help and support. And as we think about, those recovery efforts. So it was contractors and a lot of our own internal teams and maintenance are able to stand up. So we strategically looked at the low schools and really looking at our own staff and those district supported that we were receiving to be able to assess and take care of those schools. And then we focused our contracts or the professional contractors in those medium and high schools to give us assessments. So that was part of the strategy around that. And you kind of, I like to say we had that all scripted out before the storm. It's kind of something you just you work on as you go, and it was really in that triad approach around we're dealing with the immediate, but thinking about what's next, and then what's the next.
Yep. There's a couple things that don't come first to mind that I want to ask about as well, because there's so much focus on rebuilding and reopening and getting schools, but I think about food services and the work that they were doing first with shelters, then after the storm. I mean, that department was crazy busy.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to know that, when you think about our initial response. So, we were in the shelter business the first 3, 4, 5 days of the storm. So when we talk about the recovery, we're balancing both of those. And a big piece of that, we talked about our school leaders, but our food services and our incredible staff that just supported feeding. I think the number was something like 35,000 meals. I think the number was the last number that I heard around just over the course of the storm and in the shelters. So, but they had that piece, so that was happening then throughout. And then thinking about some of the food drives and feeding our community. In addition to that, I know we had a tremendous opportunity here in the district office to provide food, for our staff and for our community, and then working through that as well. But then they had to stand up, looking back at assessments in kitchens and looking at the damage, and then putting in the process to then order foods. We are fortunate that our Florida freezer, which is where we actually house the food for our cafeterias. I mean, we were fortunate that we didn't lose power there. The generators worked, so we didn't have that number of food loss within where we actually store all of our food. Obviously, within kitchens, within schools, there was some loss due to, there's rules around how long things can go without being refrigerated. So, but they were incredible in just helping provide us that support to make sure that not only our community and our students were fed throughout the storm, but then as we return to school as well.
Yep. Academic services, that team was going in circles. It seems like it's all the talk of what they were doing to try to plan for a return, double sessions, partner schools, virtual options, all these kind of things. So how did we get to where we put the 2 middle schools on the Florida virtual school and the partner school options for those that couldn't go back to their buildings?
Yeah, so that was all due to the smartest person, right? And the smartest person, like we like to say, sometimes the smartest person in the room is the room. And it was about bringing that entire collective team together. And it was just incredible work and collaboration, as can't thank enough, Dr. Cooper McCoy, Dr. Spira, our executive directors, support our academic services team around thinking about that. And the commitment, was very clear. Our superintendent, it was very clear around our commitment to our community, our schools, to keep our learners together, the community of learners. We wanted to keep them together. So that was a grounding principle that we talked about, like not wanting to separate students and separate schools around that as best as we could, right? So so really thinking through that. And we threw a lot of ideas on the wall, right? We just threw a lot of different things out. We talked double sessions. We talked about, how we can do, and we try to, and then knowing what would that look like? Because, and particularly what would the academic experience be for students? That, we talk about students first, and this was really about, the continuity of learning for students, but that academic experience, and then challenges to not create a schedule that would create significant barriers for our parents and our community as well, as far as getting kids to and from school. So we quickly pivoted away from, or moved away from, double sessions and try to do, and that's where the idea around, we had room in some schools, and, thank you to Principal Coots at
San Carlos Park,
Carlos Park, which was, had room to house 2 of our schools. So, and kind of coming up with that idea to keep them together. Yes, it is a bit of a distance, but that importance of those learners, that community of learners together, and then found some creative ways to kind of split. Not ideal, not perfect, but a commitment to keep schools. So, but that was a tremendous work and coordination on behalf of our academic services team around the thinking, and then to our leaders who actually had, our leaders, our assistants, our administrators, our teachers who actually had to now implement, and do that. And there was a lot of moving parts. It was a puzzle. But here we are, and we're making it happen.
We got it happening.
Yeah.
So the goal is set for October 17th to get everybody back to that educational environment. And with there was criteria that was set to do so. Those 9 lists. Why such a deliberate approach to reopening at that point? Kind of change the thinking from low, medium, high to you need to clear these criteria.
Yeah. So now we had the low, medium, high, but now we had to find a way to. Really quantify and just feel confident that, yes, our schools cleared something, that now they were safe to return, right? Especially, schools where might have taken in, water, so there was water intrusion and damage. So, and that not to mention, like, different systems in schools. So, so establishing that criteria was really critical to be able to sign off on, yes, we have a checklist of, is air conditioning working, intercoms working? Do we have the ability to serve food? I know we talked about indoor air quality. Was that what did that look like? Testing that and working through all of those things, by to be able to get to a place where we felt we could sign up and say, yeah, this school is ready to return.
What was the approach? It was safe, sensible, and effective?
And effective, yeah. Safe, sensible, and effective. And again, safety was, top of mind at first around that, and then sensible around what made sense. And I talked a little bit about the schedule piece around, and it may make sense here, but if it creates significant challenges, and, our current system is not perfect. I know we still have, I know our superintendent, he promised, it wasn't going to be a perfect plan. We were going to, potentially possibly make some mistakes along the way, but we were committed to those grounding principles of safe, sensible, and effective.
13 schools did open on October 17th. Yeah. How'd that make you feel?
The number wasn't large enough that first day, obviously, 13 schools, and because we wanted to have kids back in school, but again, using those grounding principles and the criteria as well. While I wish the number was larger that first day, I felt good about those 13, knowing that we had done it in a really responsible way, where the safety was at the forefront around that, and knowing that the commitment over the course of, we called it a staggered opening. So while the number might have been, I think it was the just right to be able to test out, buses back on the road, not at the significant numbers day one. They slowly increased for day two. I think we had 16 schools the second day, 46 schools the third day. And by week's end, we had all schools back, in an academic setting. I know a couple of schools started on Florida virtual school, but they all had that academic experience by the end of that week. So it was a team effort. It was a team effort, and again, tremendous appreciation to our team for that.
Did you get a chance to enjoy the accomplishment of getting every school back by the end of that week, or was your mind already moving forward to the next challenge?
I think for like 3 seconds, right? You enjoy that we have some students back, but obviously your mind's always said we want to get our kids back. We know the impacts that we've seen over the last couple of years with kids not being in school, and just the well-being of our kids and checking on them. But again, the commitment was to do it right, to be really safe in doing so, to get them back. So I think that was the grounding principle, and knowing that, but really feeling good about as they started to return, and the joy. And I know we also did provide some time. So while students were coming back, I think it was important to have opportunities for that reunification of staffs. So we had, the commitment was when a school was cleared, they had a couple of days of staff reunification to get together, and then a second day that was some staff and students and families can come back to the building, just to kind of walk around, get a sense of it. And so that third day, whatever that third day was actually students coming back and doing that. So it was definitely something that was, trying to think about, we're in a people business, right? So thinking about our teachers, our staff, and our students and families as well.
So we have the 3 schools that are still displaced: Fort Myers Beach Elementary, Sanibel, Cafarata. Can you quickly kind of touch on what is ahead in maybe the rest of the school year for those campuses?
Sure. So having had the opportunity to visit actually all 3 of those schools, Fort Myers Beach recently, as yesterday I visited, I think it's important to note, like all 3 schools, they were kind of in a little bit of a different situation. So I think with visiting Sanibel, we received news. We've had engineers out, and they've deemed the building, structurally sound. So looking at the remediation, I think there's an extended. So there's a lot more work. So there's remediation companies on the ground as we speak, remediating. So for while San Carlo is the current location of the Sanibel School, that's a shorter term, and we anticipate and hope in the coming months to be able to hopefully return those students back to that building. I think Hector Cafarata, we are working on, they're currently split. We recognize and understand that's not ideal. So we're working on a temporary location, potentially a portable site. I know there's more to come at an upcoming board meeting this week to discuss what that might look like, as well as that's the long-term, short-term plan. And then there's what is the long-term for the school, because that building took in significant water, the roof peeled back. So there's just a lot of different options that we're going to be discussing this week around the long term, but the immediate is the potential of standing up a portable campus. And then at Fort Myers Beach, we've had some preliminary reports around the structure withstood the storm, at least number of buildings there, but internally significant damage within the school, and what those decision points will be. So I think more to come with Fort Myers Beach around that. I think for the foreseeable future, St. Carlo is the location, but we've committed to having communication with all 3 of these communities weekly. So we connect with them on Fridays to give them and provide them updates. And I know by week's end, we should have a little bit more direction for like a Fort Myers Beach, and we'll provide some updates, but weekly to those communities around what they could expect to keep families and parents informed of as we're thinking through this recovery. Yeah,
well, those are the stories we're going to be following in the weeks and months, and hopefully not years ahead. But Chief of Staff Mike Ramirez, I want to thank you for giving us this kind of look back at how decisions were made for the school district of Lee County.
Thanks for the opportunity to come in. Appreciate
you coming in, and I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Lee Schools TV podcast as well. We're back again next month. See you then.